Hello and welcome to this online information session in regard to the Manitou Arts Culture and Heritage grant information. This is for the grant cycle that really begins in 2023, but the application opens right now. I'm recording in 2020. I'm Becca Sickbert. I'm the Executive Director of Creative Alliance, Manitou Springs. And it's our mission to lift the artistic and economic vitality of Manitou Springs, which is why I'm delighted to be presenting this information session that continues to move forward the cultural opportunities, programming, effectiveness, and just overall diversity of what's happening in Manitou Springs. You'll see my contact information is here. We're a resource for anyone who is looking at creating a new public art experiment or looking to work in partnership with the city of Manitou Springs. If you have any questions, please do contact me. I do not speak for the MACH Board. I don't serve on the MACH Board, and we have no grant-making authority in regard to this program. However, we are your public art resource, and we're here to celebrate everything that's happening in terms of what is the Creative District and its offerings in Manitou Springs. So let's start with addressing the question of what is a creative district? There are over 30 now in the state of Colorado, and we operate under the auspices of the Colorado Office of Economic Development and International Trade. What that really means is that our artists do a lot of heavy lifting for every community that demonstrates its diversity, its density, and its commitment to its arts and culture scene. What that means in terms of dollars is that $16.3 billion are generated every year in the state of Colorado, which is more than transportation, mining, or agriculture. So even though arts may feel really fun and lightweight at times because of the levity or the joyfulness that our artists bring, it is heavy hitting. The economic impact is real and very significant, which is why we're delighted that this particular initiative was a Creative District initiative back in 2018 to 2019 and was eventually voted in 2019 and implemented for its very first year in 2020. So let's start by addressing why. We believe that all great communities have a vibrant art and cultural scene. And to keep it vibrant, we need to reinvest in the cultural scene and its creatives. So like I mentioned, back in 2019, a 0.3% sales tax was finally voted in by the voters and approved by City Council. This goes to facilities and arts funding through 2035 and gets broken into two tiers. So tier one, if you hear about that, is a 66% portion that goes to facility improvements and operations at the Carnegie Library building in Manitou Springs, the Manitou Arts Center, the Manitou Springs Heritage Center, Miramont Castle, and Hiawatha Gardens, which is now our mobility hub. Tier two, which is what we're here to talk about today, is comprised of the rest of that 34%. And so when we look at the total that will be available in this next grant cycle, what we're looking at is about $150,000 available in those tier two competitive grants. The applications will be due on Friday, January 6th of 2023. If you need a short link to more information about the MACH Board and its resources, that's here at the bottom of the page. It's tinyurl.com/matchboard. And I'm going to go ahead and click into this just so we have it loaded. My recommendation would be to go ahead and bookmark it if you're interested in the program so you can return at any time. So I will go ahead and do that right now. Okay, getting back to our presentation. Let's talk about eligibility. This is fairly broad. So who is eligible for the match funding in 2023? That would be residents, students, businesses, artists, makers, and nonprofit organizations. And that's regardless of whether you are a professional artist or someone who is an enthusiastic amateur. Maybe you're an expert in your field. Maybe you have vibrant enthusiasm and want to put together a team and surround yourself with people who can help support your new and innovative idea. The important part is that we also welcome those kinds of applications that might be coming from people who are outside of Manitou Springs. To do that, however, you do need a fiscal sponsorship through a 501c3 nonprofit based in Manitou Springs. And you must have an MOU with that application. The organization who is working on the MOU with you needs to be at least 2 years old. If you have any questions about eligibility, you can always contact the MACH Board through their landing page. You can link to their email address. Here's an overview of the timelines. I think I've already mentioned applications are due Friday, January 6th of 2023 at 11:59 p.m. The MACH Board will then evaluate all of the applications in early 2023. They'll make their recommendations to City Council roughly in March of 2023, and then the City Council decision to fund them or not will also come about that time. That means that match funding will not be announced until about April of 2023 with notifications via email. This is where I remind everyone that if you have a great idea that needs funding before April, you might want to look at other sources or start planning way ahead for 2024 because the funds won't be available until April. Your projects will need to be completed with the full funding invested by December 31st of 2023, and then the reports will be due December 31st of 2023. As always, those project completion reports must be turned in before you try to get additional funding. So without those project reports completed, match funding isn't available in future years. Just looking at the budget. So I mentioned that we'd be talking about what kind of funding is available for Tier 2 competitive grants. This is looking at last year compared to this year. So last year, we saw that about $151,000 were available for Tier 2 grants. And they introduced the mini grants of up to $750. I'm delighted to report that this year, even though sales aren't quite as high, we're looking at about the same budget, about $150,000 will be available for the competitive Tier 2 grants. And mini grants return. So if you have a smaller project that doesn't need a great deal of funding, the mini grant program is still available. All projects, programs, or events that are seeking match funding should look to connect with what they're trying to achieve by aligning with Plan Manitou. And Plan Manitou has its own definitions of arts and culture. And so I'm not going to read this entire slide, but I do want to make sure that you know where to find Plan Manitou. And also it's Appendix A. So there's a note for you here, and the presentation that I'm giving is also available on the city's website. So you can download it, and it has helpful links, including where to click to see Appendix A. I'm going to go ahead and click into this so we can discuss it. But please note, here in Plan Manitou, we do discuss what is art. It's a broad definition with many disciplines. We also look at culture, which includes the assets, strengths, and values that contribute to Manitou Springs' eclectic character, our small town and unique feel, and then some of our historic resources. These are fairly broad. Again, if you have specific questions, you can always contact the MACH Board or connect with Creative Alliance. We're happy to answer your questions. So let's go take a quick look at Appendix A. Here, what you'll see is that there are further definitions and more specific deliverables that the community had outlined in 2017. So this is about a 5-year-old plan. Some of these items have already been achieved. I will say at this point, because 5 years have passed, and that included a global pandemic, some of the priorities have shifted. So you will see things that are maybe a little bit dated, but certainly still capture the overall essence. This particular document, and this looks small, so let me zoom in for you. It details everything from looking at things like awareness among the creative community around programs, courses, and assistance offered by state and regional organizations. So These are the kinds of things that we do in partnership with the Chamber of Commerce, with our small business development community and council, with even the BBB. We look at resources outside of Manitou Springs to deliver on Plan Manitou, which is to say, when you look through this, what we're saying is that you don't have to be based in Manitou Springs to have a big impact in our community. If you scroll through, you'll also see other specific ideas about programs or deliverables that are relevant to Manitou Springs. So I do recommend you take a look at Appendix A and Plan Manitou generally if you're new to this conversation. And it's relevant, why? Because, excuse me, the MACH Board has already published the rubric that evaluates, it essentially scores how they will be looking at every application that is submitted in this particular grant cycle. So I'd like to show you what the rubric looks like, but before we do that, the overview, here's your takeaway. It's 5 areas of importance. One is looking at the completeness, making sure that you filled in everything that you could and provided sufficient detail. 2, that the quality of your budget makes sense, that request is feasible and aligns with everything that you've said in your narrative. They should match up and make sense and support each other. 3, program or project alignment should demonstrate that it understands Plan Manitou and what that master plan is trying to achieve. 4, that your program or project can demonstrate significant community impact for the community of Manitou Springs. And finally, that the person or project team behind this particular idea possesses the experience to complete the project and make it successful. So let's take a look at the rubric itself. And again, this is published directly from the MACH Board's landing page. So do bookmark it. If you have any questions, you can always revisit it. Here's where you will see the breakout of the entire rating categories and what those different scores are based on. Everything from the quality of your budget request, right, to the program and project alignment. Here's the program and project impact. And it includes multiple dimensions: social, artistic, creative, innovative. This is a broad perspective on what impact could look like, but you do need to be able to speak to how you would evaluate it and measure it. It's also asking the question about the project team. Do you have the necessary experience and expertise to complete it? And then backing up just a little bit, you'll see that the points that get awarded for alignment with Plan Manitou are significant. So do be sure that you can describe how you're addressing Plan Manitou master plan values in some way. Okay, so that leads us to just a general overview on some of the learning that we saw in 2021 and 2022 about great ideas that didn't get funded. And so some of those proposals had great ideas, had big scope and a lot of vision. Where they didn't get funding was because they might have been incomplete, they were missing requirements, they might have been missing details, or just not making a strong case for why they should receive funding. It's also possible that those unsuccessful ideas didn't explain the community impact that they would be driving. And if they did explain the impact, sometimes that impact wasn't quite in alignment with the Plan Manitou values and what those achievements were. Finally, sometimes the budgets were a bit vague. And I would mention here that the more you're asking for, the more detail you should be providing about where those dollars are flowing and how the impact will be driving forward what Manitou Springs is hoping to achieve. And finally, projects that assumed a particular location, but didn't have that location already finalized or secured either via a contract or city approval, were questioned. So I would highly recommend that if you're looking to do something at a specific place, that you contact the venue owner or operator to make sure that they have the capacity and are willing to host your event so that you can talk about that in your narrative and also demonstrate that in your budget. So on the other hand, if we want to look at what successful applications demonstrate, is that they are complete. All the fields are filled out, that they are sufficiently detailed. So not just filled out, but are providing details that are useful, or maybe even describing how the program worked in the past. That the application can articulate the community impact, can really demonstrate what that will mean for the community of Manitou Springs. And of course, as we've discussed, that the project or the program or the event is in alignment with Plan Manitou. And finally, the budget and its narrative should be cohesive, should support each other in their storytelling, and should demonstrate that they are both reasonable and feasible. If you have any questions, you can always contact me, but this is the end of part 1. So I will complete this portion and we'll move on to part 2, in which we'll talk more about the application and what's new this year. If you're joining us, this is part 2. We are talking about how to get started, some tips on budgeting generally, and the budget portion of the new application. And then, of course, what to do if and when you get funded. So let's get right into it. First of all, the new application is beautiful, and it really compresses what used to be many different forms. So what used to be the mini grant request, the form for Manitou businesses, residents, artists, and everyone else in Manitou Springs, people or orgs outside of Manitou Springs, and then folks or students involved with District 14 are compressed into one application. So it's just one link, and I've linked to it here in the presentation. I will mention that because it's new and it's quite robust, it will take a while to load. So I will go ahead and click this yellow button and give it just a moment to load. In the meantime, I'd like to mention that if you've received funding in the past, please be sure to visit the MACH Board's landing page and complete your final project, your project completion report, before the end of this year. So that would be December 31st of 2022. Be sure to upload your completion report. It's not long, but I've also linked to it here in the presentation. So once you have that completed, then you are eligible to apply for more funds. So at this point, this should have loaded. This was what you'll be seeing, and we would need to apply for a grant. So I'm going to go ahead and click this button. What I'll mention is that even if you know that you only need a mini grant, be sure to create an account before you actually apply. Everything depends on your ability to return to that account. So I will go ahead and make sure that we are logging into an account that's already created, but I will also kind of talk through how to do that. So going back here, I'd love to mention that this is really how to get started if you haven't created an account already. What will happen is that button I was just about to click, the blue button that says apply for a grant, we'll click that. Then we'll click sign up and wait for just a moment. Again, it is a large application and it just takes a moment to think, especially if you have limited Wi-Fi, as I do here. Then what you'll do is enter in your email address and password in this particular field, but make sure you click sign up, this little link here, before you start applying for a grant. You want to make sure you have an account before you complete your application. Once you click accept to authorize, the system will kick out a confirmation email, and sometimes that winds up in your spam or junk folder. So please be sure to make sure you find that and click on it to authorize your account and complete that setup. It's essentially an account verification tool. So follow that process, and then you'll be ready to submit your application. And we'll talk about budgets. So I just want to make sure that we are logged in here. Again, this assumes that I have gone through all the steps in verifying. So I've created my account, I've verified it, and now we're logging in here. It will take a moment. So going back here. Sometimes when I meet with artists or small businesses generally, what stresses people out the most, what they find the most complex, is budgeting as a whole. And so a tool that I love to use, partly because it can be stressful and partly because it's a great visualization, is this idea of breathing in and breathing out. So I'd invite you, if this is stressful, to take a moment just to pause, breathe in and breathe out, and know that budgeting is about that simple. So what does that actually look like? Before we get started with the online application, make sure that you understand that the way budgeting works in general is that you have money coming in and then you have money going out. And the most successful budgets balance both of those. And so what money coming in could look like are contributed funds that might be grants, corporate contributions. Maybe it's individual donations. Maybe it's a fundraising event that gets you some seed money for your program, project, or event. And then there could be earned income. That would include workshops, ticket sales, maybe it's some kind of in-kind donation. So this would be something that isn't necessarily cash, but could be equipment, instruments, perhaps a service. And then you would total everything into your income. So think of that as your green money in. And then we would look at what's going out. Oftentimes for programs that are funded by MACH or just arts administration programs as a whole, what we see are that the expenses would include artist stipends, equipment, printing and copying, telecommunications, travel and meetings, marketing and advertising, staff and volunteer training, contract services, or miscellaneous fees that align with the program and make sure that it is executed well. So then you would total that. And ultimately, you take the money coming in, money going out, and that net should be zero. If you have questions about budgeting or want an explainer video, there's a link here at the bottom. This goes to Springboard for the Arts, an excellent organization out of Minnesota. They walk through budgeting, and it's just a wonderful video if you're new to this concept and want a more detailed explanation. Okay. So let's go ahead and dig in. What you'll see here, again, assuming that we have already created an account, is that we can apply for our program, project, or event. And so as you'll see here, amount $750 or less will qualify as a mini grant. So if what we know is that we have a program coming up that will cost us $500, we could go ahead and enter that amount. And you'll see that these fields are compressible. So if things disappear, you can always go back and find that section and then just expand it again, right? So don't panic, it's still there. And if what we know that we would like to do is create a kite workshop, let's say that we want to make some kind of beautiful art kites and offer a hands-on kite fabrication opportunity in Manitou Springs. This is where we would go ahead and do that. And so I will say the discipline category, it's a little bit limited. And so if what you find is that you don't see something that could be multidisciplinary, maybe mixed media is your choice, or you could go with other, but generally speaking, you will see all kinds of opportunities and it's a wide variety. So in this case, I'll go with mixed media. And the project description and timeline goes into a little bit of detail. I will remind everyone that the more you ask for, the more detail you'll want to provide. In this case, we're only asking for $500. So if this is a project description and timeline, I want to explain who, what, where, when, how, where we are taking this project, and then provide more detail down here about who specifically, who's the audience, what's the impact that we're hoping to achieve, and thinking about Plan Manitou and how our program aligns with that will help us answer these questions. So again, this would be our who, what, where, when, why. And then here it's how the community will benefit from that $500 kite building workshop. As we progress through the application, This will ask for my contact information. So I would fill out my information here. And again, anyone who is based in Manitou Springs can go ahead and apply. The eligibility is in part 1 if you want more detail on that. It's also available on the MACH Board's website. And so finally, I would load any images here that would help tell the story of why my program would be successful. Perhaps it's a design I've already created about the kites, or maybe it's a related workshop in which I offered, I don't know, lantern building or something somewhat analogous. And perhaps it's a schematic of the kite, and I just want people to know how we're going to go about making that happen. So this is where we would complete our story and submit it. If I want to come back, I can always click Save and Finish later because I've created an account. And it may take a moment to save, but just be patient. I will mention that if you are asking for more than $750, what you might want to do, and here are all of my examples that I've been working on. So I'm going to go ahead and delete these now, just because I know I won't need them. And you can do that if you have a couple of different ideas and decide you just want to get rid of them later, or you can hang on to those ideas for future use. Because this is an example that we're working together, I'll go back in, but after I show you something here. So I am going to pull up just a quick overview. And this is something that I'd recommend if you're creating a budget for a project that is more than perhaps your typical $750 mini grant. So here I have a kite building workshop that is a bigger scope, that what we're trying to achieve is something bigger than just maybe a one-day small scale workshop. That here perhaps it's a 2-day workshop, and that we're including everything from materials to snacks to kite fabrication time. And so I've gone into a bit of detail. What you'll see is that I'm thinking about starting with the $2,000. So again, this is much more than just a small scale, maybe like a 5-person event. Now I'm thinking that I want to have at least 50 people for 2 days. And I'm assuming that I will be asking for $5 each as a registration fee. And so with the match grant funds, I would ask for $2,000. Here is the 250 that I would be asking, that I would be generating rather, by asking people for their $5 registration fee. And that would get me to total income of $2,250. Then what you'll see is down here in expenses, I've done a lot of research. So here's where I've captured that to get my dowels, my string, my handmade paper, my glue, and perhaps some nylon to create these kites, it would cost me $870. Whatever your materials fees are, I would recommend that, given that costs this year are higher because of inflation, don't assume that what happened 1 or 2 years ago will reflect what's happening now. So do your research. If prices go down, wonderful, but make sure you know what you're looking at. The more research and detail you have, the more likely your project is to get funded. Then I would also look at staffing. So in this case, it's kite fabrication facilitation. I would want to pay my kite artists for their time and expertise. And I'm assuming that we'll have 2 days of snacks for everyone who's involved, all those 50 people and my kite fabrication facilitators. And I would also look at making sure that we can pay our venue operator for the use of their space. In this case, we're assuming it's $150 as an example. But I do want to show you, if part of the work that happens is your venue operator says that they want to donate the space to you, but it's valued at $150, what you could do is move this up to your income and then reflect that it's an in-kind contribution. So then what we're showing is that our total income is $2,400, which changes the calculation here. Maybe we could ask for a little bit less. In that case, we would only need to ask for $1,700. And then you'll see that our total income matches our total expenses. So it's nice to have a worksheet, even if it's a napkin or a scrap of paper, to do your calculations before you start working in the application. At least that helps me. If you want to work in the application, you can do that too. But now what we'll do is transfer these costs to the application itself. So here's what we know, that the funds that we're asking for are $1,700. So if we go back into the application, we can click on this edit button, or we could just view it. Here's where you'll see, this is the view. This is a quick overview if you have more than one project that you're working on. Oh goodness, that's fun. Well, let's start a new application, shall we? If you happen to delete your project on accident, like I just did, don't panic. This is why I'd recommend that you start working on your application and narrative, just in case you might have a mouse like mine that's a little overactive. But here is where we would go ahead and request what we know we need for our project. This is key. Please make sure that whatever you're requesting here, okay, so we know that we're requesting $1,700. That means then we would ask for $1,700 here. The description is that these are match grant funds. So I'm going to move this tab over just to make it a little bit easier for myself. So the description, I'm going to paste that in, match grant funds. It might default to expenses. Make sure that you change this to revenue, right? This is the green, this is the breathing in of the project. This is money coming in. So we want to make sure to add that budget line item. And then you'll see that reflected here. So we also know that we need to add our registration fees because we know that we have this coming in. So that's $250. The description's a little longer, so I'm going to cut and paste this particular field. I know it's $250 total. Registration fee, this is also revenue, so I will add that. And then we've got this in-kind venue contribution. Oops, sorry. I'm going to copy the description knowing it's $150. That is also revenue. So then my total here is $2,100. Good, then as we start working through the expenses, I know that I have $870 tied up in materials because of all the research I've done ahead of time. So here's my $870. I'll just paste in that description, and this is not revenue. Of course, this is an expense, so I will add that. And then you just keep working through the rest of what you know is coming based on your research. So this is $1,000 to make sure that I am paying my artists. Also an expense, I will add that. And then snacks. I will mention that the budget tool I pointed out kind of has a no snack budget versus a snack budget. This is not a requirement. I'm not at all suggesting you have to feed people. I am saying that if what I know is that to make this program successful, we need to have that additional layer, then do contemplate that. You'll also, of course, need to be able to defend it as part of your overall program offering to make sure that that makes sense. Anyway, so $230 just to continue building out this particular example. So now what we see is that the application has shown that expenses minus revenue equals $0. So yes, it is dynamic, and as we go, this continues to add up. If, however, what happened is perhaps back in my early calculations, I thought I would need to ask for $2,000. Remember, before we got the venue donated in kind. If this had been our match grant income, and we had tracked that as revenue, then this would not, the revenue would not equal the expenses, and it would show that this was a $300 discrepancy. So you can go ahead and change this if you like, knowing that this no longer is reflective of what is true for the program. I can go ahead and change it. Again, we knew it was $1,700. This is our match grant income, and it's revenue. So adding it, again, this is how you would, on the fly, go ahead and adjust your budget. Okay, so here, because we're asking for more than $750, there is more question, just more scrutiny about what we're going to do with the funds. And frankly, that's because the MACH Board wants to be good stewards. It is their purpose to evaluate and make recommendations to City Council on how to expend this kind of income. These public funds go to public purpose and public benefit. And so filling out these fields completely allows them to distinguish what projects should be funded. So here's where we would want to go into as much detail as makes sense. You will see that there are tooltips here. If you hover over them, of course, that's a tooltip. And so if you have questions about the field and you hover over the question mark, it will tell you you have 5,000 characters, not words, but characters or less, to tell us about you, the artist, the organizer, or the organization, your background, your mission, what it is that you're trying to achieve in the world. And so if we are continuing to work through our example, this would be our kite workshop. We had talked a little bit about how this might be perhaps a multimedia, mixed media, or other. Choose what feels like the most accurate category for your program. And here's where I would offer up, if I'm an organization, a statement about my organization. What is our mission? In the case of the Creative Alliance, we lift artistic and economic vitality for the community of Manitou Springs. If I were an artist, I would want to go into detail about the work that I do, my discipline, and what my perspective is on this planet. As we progress through the application, here's where we would go into greater detail and answer the questions. So again, if you have a moment of pause and just want some more context, you can tooltip hover. And it says, tell us about what you would like to do if your project were to receive funding. So answer the question, ask yourself, what is it that I'm trying to do with this funding? What is it that we are trying to do with this funding? And go into some detail about what that would look like. Then here, what impact are you hoping to have on the community and how will you evaluate your success? It is useful to have some idea of your metrics, your measurements, like what does success look like for your program, your project, or your event? And here's another question. Just tell us about the impact your project would have on the Manitou Springs community and the metrics you will use to evaluate your success. So kind of think in a broader sense, who, what, where, and when, and go into detail to the extent that you can. You have 5,000 characters to work with. And if you want to work outside of this form, maybe, again, it's on a scrap of paper, maybe it's a Word document, maybe it's a Pages document, maybe it's, just a text field. Wherever you want to start to work on this, you can always cut and paste later or just type it in as you go. If you have limited access to technology, you can always go to a Pikes Peak Library District branch and ask for help logging into a computer, because this application does require an online application to submit your ideas for grant funding. So then here it will also ask, if you're a nonprofit, please summarize your major contributors and in-kind contributors for the past 2 years. And then down here, how are the people carrying out this program qualified and prepared to do so? If at any point you want to know why they are asking you for this information, just go back to the rubric. So we had talked about the rubric. It goes into details about how those applications will be awarded. And so this particular question is probably trying to get at, how can your particular project team make sure that this can be a success? That you want to make sure that you are making a case for your team, or maybe it's you as an individual, and why you should be funded because you are confident you can demonstrate success in the past, and that you are confident that you will be successful in the future. And then, of course, what is your timeline for spending the funds? If you're looking to do that in January, February, or March of 2023, that will likely not align with the award schedule for the funds, because those checks don't get cut until about April of 2023. We go into more detail on all of the timelines in part 1, so feel free to back up if you like. And then, of course, looking at the anti-discrimination statement, because these are public funds, it's important that this is an inclusive process. And finally, looking at contact information. Who are you? Where is that check going? All of these pieces help to identify what kind of application you are submitting. If I'm filling out an application for an organization, the logic will then ask me to upload my IRS letter. If I am not applying as an organization and I'm based in, say, Colorado Springs, then I may need to click here that I'm applying with a pass-through organization or the school district. Either way, it will offer up additional fields to make sure that we're working through this. It could be both, I suppose. But then here is where we would want to have our memorandum of understanding, our MOU, attached as part of this application if we were applying through a pass-through organization because I'm an artist or an organization not based in Manitou Springs. And then down here, the optional image uploads, think of this as a field to help visually tell the same story that you've just told verbally within the application and then numerically within your budget. The more cohesive you can make all of those pieces, the stronger your application is. So here, if, again, with our kite workshop example, if I had some beautiful photos of the work that had already been done by my kite fabricators, I could load that here. Or perhaps it's a venue schematic that shows how we would arrange all of the tables to make sure that people are safe during a flu epidemic, a COVID epidemic, what have you, that we are demonstrating our ability to achieve success with this program regardless of the circumstances. This could also be perhaps another event that demonstrate the kinds of events that my program team has pulled together before. So whatever that might be in your case, this is an opportunity for you to show the MACH Board what your particular approach to these arts, culture, and heritage moments might look like. And then, of course, before you submit the application, you can go back up here and click Save and Finish Later. I highly, highly recommend you create your account before you start the process because that will allow you to save your application. And it does take a little while. So this is a great opportunity to have your cup of coffee or tea or whatever suits you. And then, as you can see, I have 2 applications here, so I can go back in at any point and make sure that I'm looking at the right one or editing the correct one. And when I'm finished, it will show each one of these sections will light up in green, and then I can go ahead and submit it from here if I like. So this assumes that we've completed all of the fields that address those who, what, where, when, how, and why kinds of questions that really demonstrate how this program, project, or event would align with the criteria that the MACH Board have shared with you. So then let's just assume that this program, that your program or project gets funded. Let's just answer the question of what to do. What does that look like? So be sure that when you get that email notification that you get your W-9 in as soon as possible. The city can't process checks without it. And so the earlier you can respond, the better off you're going to be. And then, of course, you'll want to credit the program in your promotion. There's more information on that on the MACH Board's landing page, including this new logo here that they've developed for our use in 2023. And you'll want to make sure that you're mentioning that and using the logo and everything from news releases to posters, flyers, graphics generally. And then we would invite you to tag the City of Manitou Springs or even the Creative Alliance in your social media. We would love to help you celebrate your success and make sure that people know that your event or program is coming up and to make sure that you are driving as much participation as possible. And then start thinking ahead to your report. Of course, take photos. And I would recommend this for all artists everywhere. The more photos you have that capture your process, the way that you approach a creative problem and try to solve it in community really helps build a case for why you should receive funding, whether it's the match application process or another grant application process entirely. And of course, it's useful just as a business opportunity and operational suggestion to track your expenses as they occur, whether that, again, is a piece of paper, a notebook, a ledger. an Excel document, maybe it's Google Sheets, whatever it takes. The more you track it, the better your program will progress because you know where you are. And then when it's time to report, you don't have to dig through receipts. You can just check your tracking. And of course, finally, you'll want to make sure that you go back through the completion report and submit it. Get that in before the end of the year so that you're eligible for the next round of funding. With that, we've completed this particular information session around the Manitou Arts Culture and Heritage Initiative and the funds that are available for 2023. If you have any questions, you can always contact Creative Alliance Manitou Springs or the MACH Board directly. Regardless of what happens, we wish you all the luck and we can't wait to see what you do.